So, hey everybody, this is Leatherwood Hi-Lux podcast. You got myself, Corbett Leatherwood, and Chris Wu, and we're going to talk a bit about the history of the Leatherwood art scope and really Leatherwood optics and Hi-Lux optics and how that came to be. We've been getting some questions from our viewers about how the company really came into being, and there's some various stories out there, so we figured we'd go ahead and just address that. Chris, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. How are you, Corbett?
I'm doing outstanding. This is going to be such a fun and interesting topic. It's very personal to me, of course, and it's very personal to you.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we'll start with the Leatherwood, the concept of the Leatherwood scope, and then maybe we'll jump to Hi-Lux and then work our way, in the middle from there.
Yeah, so, sounds great.
The Leatherwood art scope came into being, in the mid 60s. There's some conjecture around the official date. I've actually received letters and information from former, I'll call them operators, that have mentioned using the art system. The official timeline, I've got the patent that shows the submission of the patent was in 1968. But to fully understand the concept, it was being worked on by my father well before that. He actually was working on the concept when he was in college. He was a mathematics major, loved shooting. And this concept of having a trajectory compensating scope was on his mind all the time. When he was in Vietnam, it afforded him the opportunity to hone his craft. And during his tour, the Viet Cong were sniping into their base. And so he began developing his concept both with the scope itself, which was the 3-9, and then the base, the external mount, which is actually being still in use today. So if I pull up here, you can see you have a scope, which is a scope. In this case, the M1000 Pro is a 2-10, but initially you had the Redfield 3-9.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I think to put everything into perspective of how revolutionary the art scope was, I think at the time, the mil-dot reticle wasn't even invented yet until 1972. So all they had at the time was just a fine crosshair, fine duplex reticle. And in order to shoot longer distances past your zero, they would have to use some sort of Kentucky windage, like hold maybe like middle of the lower right quadrant to even get on target. So something like the art scope was truly amazing for its time, truly revolutionary.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because if you take a look at, you hear about the famous, some of the famous snipers, right? You think of Carlos Hathcock. Right. And there's that legendary, we'll get to Waldron in a moment, but you've got Carlos Hathcock, and one of the famous images is him in that sitting position with his unertal.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think about it, if anybody shoots at the competitions or you've seen the picture, the unertal is a very small, long, tubular optic, and there's no room for internal adjustment, and it has a fine crosshair in it. So the way that the shooter compensates for the trajectory is this external mount. And for those of you who shoot in Ohio or at the different competitive matches, you've got to know your elevation and your windage when using that optic. And as Chris is stating, to have a system like the A.R.T, then it moves the A.R.T1, and then eventually the A.R.T2, and then what we have today, to have this external system that you didn't have to count clicks and you didn't have to even know the range to your target was very revolutionary. And one of the concerns that my father had was when in stressful situations, particularly combat, particularly receiving fire, the ability to return accurate fire quickly and at potentially multiple targets was imperative to survival. Mm-hmm. So the ability to frame, aim, and shoot, the concept of frame, aim, and shoot, and then have the scope actually do the ranging for you. So you're doing nothing but, framing the target. The scope is compensating the trajectory. You never have to take your eye off the target. You don't have to worry about an external, like now we have these laser rangefinders, which we discovered in rain and inclement weather. They don't work so well out to farther distances, especially if you're hunting and you have a commercial version of the ranging. So the A.R.T scope is an all-in-one rangefinder, trajectory compensating rifle scope. Mm-hmm. And so that was the concept. So when they were competing, so there was the Marines, they were doing their thing. The Army was doing their thing, and they were evaluating which system to go. The Army went with my father's A.R.T system. The Marines went with the M40 optic. Both were very good. Both had revolutionary framing reticles. The Marines, the M40, which we make a replica of the actual exact reticle.
Green anodized finish.
Yep. And the cool thing about, not to diverge too much, but the cool thing about that, it was the first and second focal plane concept, where as you frame the target, it gave you a rangefinder inside the optic, but you still had to do holdover. Mm-hmm. And so with the A.R.T, you did not have to do holdover. And so that is the concept or the principle that through the years, my father enhanced and worked and met your dad, and Hi-Lux was born, and then the M1000, now the M1000 Pro, the M1200, which we'll get into. But that is the basic concept: an externally adjustable optic that does it on its own based on the cam setting. And so you just frame, aim, and shoot, that easy. And we have a video as well of Chris and Scott out at the range. And actually, we have a lot of videos, but the most recent videos of Chris and Scott at the range engaging, I think it's 200 to 600 yards, Chris?
Yeah. So we were out at Angeles. The first steel they had was at 200, and we were engaging targets between 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The distance wasn't exact. Like some of the targets were at like 330, 420, and so forth. But just even by framing the target, we were able to get solid hits within the center of mass of the targets. So the A.R.T scope works phenomenally well. At first, it kind of blew my mind at how quick we were able to get on target. I'm used to using a laser. Before the A.R.T scope, I was used to using a laser rangefinder, dialing my clicks, and then holding center on the target, or off a little bit for wind. But with this, it just cuts out that step. And I can imagine in the guerrilla warfare battle scenario in the jungle, when you're getting shot at, you don't have that time to range your target. Having the ability to frame them would allow you to get on target much faster and return accurate fire, like you were saying.
Yep. A story that I have to share about the value or the speed of the frame, aim, and shoot. We were at a trade show, and a customer came up, and we were talking about the A.R.T scope. And I was explaining the value of the frame, aim, and shoot, and telling them, well, you can range the target, and then you don't have holdover, and you can engage the target. He says, well, I can do that with any scope. And I'm like, well, the scope has this built-in rangefinder, and you don't have to, deal with all that. He's like, well, I can do that. I can do that now. I just use a laser rangefinder. And if I know, my dope, I see the range. I can, dial my clicks in, and I can be right on it, or I can use my BDC holdover. And I was like, okay, I understand what you're saying. Let's race. I have come under fire, or I see the deer, whatever it might be. I get onto the target. I frame the target. I shoot the target. where are you in your process, right? Are you still using your laser rangefinder? Have you already used your laser rangefinder and now you're trying to reacquire the target because you had to take your eyes off the target? And you know as well as I do, a lot of times deer, your game, they don't stay in the same place. They're not hanging out. So they might, be walking, even if they're grazing, that even just a few steps for them, and they go from being in a good sight picture to maybe they've just dropped below, step behind a tree, or they've dropped below your line of sight to be able to successfully engage them. So speed matters. And that is the value and the beauty of the ART system.
So Corbett, I have a question. Some of our viewers have asked us, and maybe you can help us answer this. Do you know what inspired Jim to develop the ART scope? Was it hunting related, or was it something just his intellectual curiosity trying to make something to make shooting easier at longer distances?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And I've had a few people ask me that as well. He grew up in the country on the Texas, central Texas. And hunting was a big part of his life. And so he was a hunter, he loved shooting, and he was a mechanical genius. And so his thing was early on, how to make it easier, how not to miss that shot when you go hunting. And, with having iron sights versus having a scope, he began the idea of this compensating optic as he was coming out of college. He graduates ROTC, second lieutenant, goes to Vietnam. He's in a base that comes under fire from Viet Cong, and our ability to accurately return fire was a little bit impeded. And so the training for the soldiers that we had, for the ones who knew how to use a scope, it still, wasn't that great. There wasn't really a formal sniper training program. And that just fell into his wheelhouse. And so he started, he had access to a machine shop. He was figuring out a way how to return fire. So he put his idea into action. And a gentleman actually that was in the same Quonset hut shared with me a conversation that he had with my father during that true development process. And he said, my dad asked him, so what do you think goes into bullet trajectory? And the gentleman was, well, there's gravity, there's, the speed of the bullet. And so he's coming up, and my dad's like, yeah, there's a bit more than that. And he said he just turned around and he just started, doing his design. And after a few trial tests, he came up with his prototype. And he had I guess, according to legend, we came under fire. He took his invention out, returned after a little bit. And as the stories related to me, he said that those guys weren't going to be shooting at our soldiers anymore. And so in that, he had a concept, he proved the concept. And the thing that also drove his design was simplicity. Not so much the simplicity of the design itself, because there's a lot of math and calculation that goes into it, but simplicity for the end user. He knew that our soldiers were young, not necessarily experienced in shooting, and would be under very stressful conditions of fighting for their life. So he designed the ART, that frame, aim, and shoot system, to make it easier for our soldiers not to have to worry about math, counting clicks, even having to worry about range estimation. They could simply frame, aim, and shoot. And so the Marines, as I mentioned a little earlier, the Marines were working on their M40. The Army was evaluating whether or not to go with the ART scope. And there's a book called The Long Range War, Sniping in Vietnam, that covers a lot of detail around the development of the sniper program. It's got copies of the letters, the program itself that the U.S. Army was going through during that time. It's a very good book. And for history aficionados or folks who are interested in learning more about it, I recommend that book. And my godfather, Mitch Warbell, was good friends with my father. And so Mitch was working on the silencer aspect. And so they partnered up on how to build this system. And so that was a little bit later, the A.R.T and that program. But specifically during the Vietnam era, the M21 was an accurized M14 with the A.R.T scope and then a night scope set. And the A.R.T scope for him, after it got evaluated and the system worked, and it revolutionized our sniper program.
I'd like to take just a couple steps, just maybe one step back. So during the time, what was the sniper program like? Do you know? I assume it's not as advanced and as developed as it is today.
No.
How long was the duration of the program?
Yeah, so we didn't really have a sniper program. And what happened during Vietnam is the military or Marines, the guys on the ground, realized we had to develop a sniper program to be able to figure out how to employ, embed, and leverage accurate sniper fire against a very lethal enemy. And so that was all being developed. So you had, one group that was focused on how do we employ them? So writing the SOPs on how to employ snipers. You had, how do you embed them into units? Are they a brigade level asset or are they a battalion level asset? All of that being defined. And so you've got that aspect of it. And then you've got the actual execution. Well, what does it look like? How long does it take to train them? And from a training perspective, you've got the marksmanship aspect itself. So do you even know how to fire a rifle? Do you even know how to get a sight picture using an optic? There's iron sights, but using a scope is different than using iron sights. How do you zero it? How do you, compensate for, the mirage effects or just different things, right? And so there's that aspect of training. So anything that you can do to speed up that life cycle and you graduate proficient marksmen, proficient snipers is critical when you have that need for any unit. The A.R.T scope, so as you're building the competency of actually being able to shoot, if you can eliminate the need to count clicks, to calculate your dope with math, you begin to shorten that life cycle of training that's required. The A.R.T scope does that. It does that today. As my 13-year-old daughter had never shot over 25 yards, but I trained her on how to get a proficient sight picture, how to breathe properly, and how to squeeze the trigger. I took her to 300, 500 yard range, and she was hitting steel using the A.R.T scope, using the frame, aim, and shoot methodology. So once you have the basics, once you're proficient with your marksmanship, the A.R.T scope readily translates and is quickly trained for that. And so we had, I think the sniper program in Vietnam was just a few weeks, and then they were able to, I think we actually have some footage, maybe we can lay some footage over this for our viewers of a few of the training camps that are in Vietnam. So does that answer your question, Chris?
Yeah. So I'm wondering, so were these snipers, were they trained on the ground here before deploying, or they got drafted and got sent there and they decided to become snipers and go to camps like Bearcat? or Bearcat to receive sniper training?
Great question. So if you're familiar with how the Army does business today, you can take your ASVAB and you can get tested and you can, have some level of influence on which branch you go to. Back during Vietnam, during the draft, there was a large influx of, soldiers that were being pulled in. And so it was almost like a volunteer. It was like, okay, we're in the middle of this. We need snipers. And so how do we get these snipers? And we actually have a video interview with Rene McAree, who was in Vietnam at the time, and he heard, hey, they're going to build this sniper program. Why don't you go? And so he's like, okay. And he became, one of the first official U.S. Army snipers. And so that's really how it was. It was like, can you shoot accurately? Send somebody from your unit to become a sniper. So, and hey, maybe we can put the link or something in, in the video, or if you just go to our the history channel of our website, you can see that interview. We have a few interviews actually with a few snipers on that page.
Yeah, Rene McAree's interview is very interesting. Love to have him on the podcast sometime, just to pick his brain and hear stories from him.
Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and call him out right here, right now on this episode. Rene, you told me that you were going to come on and be part of our podcast, so I'm calling you out right now to kind of join us. So, yeah, he did commit that he's going to come on. And then Rick Bernardi is another one. Now he was later. Right. So you got to understand that the A.R.T was used, from the mid-late 60s through 1988. And so we have, a whole, group of snipers that were trained on the M21 system. So, so you got the Vietnam era with the A.R.T.L, the A.R.T.1 as it's called as well sometimes. And then you have the A.R.T.2, which came out a number of years later. My dad made some improvements there, and I even remember, from the A.R.T.2 perspective, building the case. There's a protective case that the A.R.T fits in, and he actually worked with my stepfather building that design. So I was a kid then and didn't fully grasp the entire implication of what they were working on, but yeah, those were some fun times. So Chris, I think based on how this conversation has been going, and so viewers, I hope you're finding some value in this. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about the history, and we're just getting started because we're going to jump into the post-Vietnam era up to 1988, and then there were some quiet years, and then we're going to talk about when my father met John Woo and Hi-Lux Leatherwood was born. And so we're going to jump into that. But I think a great next episode will be for us to reach out to a few of the snipers and just have them come on our show and talk about, the Vietnam era, maybe the post-Vietnam, pre-1988 era. And then we can jump into the modern day art scope. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that'd be add tremendous value. I'd love to hear some of these personal anecdotes that Rene McAree and Rick Bernardi have.
Absolutely. And if there are any viewers out there watching this, if you're a Vietnam veteran, veteran who's used the M21 at any point in your military career, we'd love to hear from you. And if you're interested in coming on our show and talking about, the training that you received or the experience that you had with the art scope, we'd love to feature you. So please reach out to us. You can reach out. Chris, what's the best email if they're interested in sharing their story?
So just send us an email at info@hiluxoptics.com. That's HI-LUXOPTICS.com.
Great. All right. Well, I think for today's episode, that will be a wrap. And we look forward to getting Rick and Renee on the call. Anybody else who might be interested who wants to join us. And please send us any questions that you might have, or if you want to see other information on our podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.